My family abused my child and thought I would look the other way. I fought back and changed everything they believed about their perfect life. The words echoed in my mind like a bad headline I'd scrolled past on my phone, but this wasn't some stranger's tragedy. It was mine, unfolding in the dim light of our suburban kitchen where the coffee maker gurgled its last drip and the fridge hummed indifferently as if the world hadn't just cracked open. It started with Jamie's quiet confession that afternoon, my 12-year-old son with his messy brown hair and that oversized hoodie he wore like armor, sitting at the breakfast bar after school, picking at a peanut butter sandwich I'd made him, his backpack slung carelessly on the floor next to muddy sneakers from soccer practice. He'd been distant for weeks, shrugging off my questions about weekends at Grandma and Grandpa's house, those supposed idyllic escapes to their sprawling home in the next town over, with its manicured lawn and the pool Jamie loved splashing in during summers. But today, as rain pattered against the window like hesitant fingers, he finally broke, his voice barely above a whisper, saying, "Mom, I don't want to go back there." And when I pressed, kneeling down to his level, my heart already sinking because a mother's intuition screams before words do, he told me about the games Uncle Chris played in the basement, the ones that made him feel weird and scared, the touches that weren't accidents, and how Grandpa had walked in once and just laughed it off, telling Jamie to toughen up, that it was family roughhousing, and Grandma had shushed him later, baking cookies, as if sugar could erase the shame. My stomach twisted, bile rising as I held him, his small frame shaking against mine, and in that moment, the perfect facade of my family shattered. The one I'd clung to through my own childhood of hushed arguments and forced smiles at holiday dinners, where Dad's booming voice dominated and Mom's quiet compliance kept the peace. And Chris, my older brother, the golden boy with his sales job and charming grin, always getting away with everything because he was the one who made it. I felt the betrayal like a physical wound, a knife twisting in my gut. Because how could they, my own blood, do this to my child, the boy I'd fought so hard to protect after my divorce from Alex 5 years ago, the one who'd left us in a haze of work stress and late nights, but at least he'd never harmed Jamie. No, this was worse. This was the people who'd raised me, who'd babysat Jamie every other weekend so I could pull double shifts at the hospital as a nurse, thinking I was giving him stability, family roots in our otherwise uprooted life. The anger surged hot and immediate, mingling with a grief so deep it hollowed me out, guilt crashing in waves because I'd missed the signs, the bedwetting that started again, the sudden aversion to hugs, the way he'd flinch when the phone rang with Grandma's ringtone, that cheerful chime I'd set years ago. I wiped Jamie's tears with my sleeve, murmuring, "It's okay, baby, you're safe now," even as my own eyes blurred, and I knew I had to act, couldn't let this fester like the secrets in my family always did, the ones Mom whispered about Dad's temper or Chris's phases that we never discussed. I tucked Jamie into bed early that evening, after ordering pizza he barely touched, the cardboard box sitting greasy on the counter as I paced the living room, rain now pounding harder outside, mirroring the storm inside me. My fingers trembled as I dialed Mom's number, the phone cold against my ear, and when she answered with her usual breezy, "Hello, dear, how's my grandson?" I unleashed it all, my voice cracking, but steady, accusing them of the unimaginable, demanding to know why they'd allowed it, why Grandpa dismissed it, why Chris, thought he could touch my son and walk away unscathed. She gasped, denied at first, saying Jamie must be exaggerating, kids do that, but I cut her off, shouting, "No, Mom, this isn't a story, this is abuse, and you all thought I'd look the other way, like I always have, keeping the peace for your perfect life with the Sunday brunches and the family photos on Facebook." Dad got on the line then, his tone gruff and defensive, barking, "What the hell is this about? Chris wouldn't hurt a fly." And I could picture him in his recliner, remote in hand, Netflix paused on some crime drama that now felt too real. The confrontation escalated, voices rising until I was sobbing, telling them I'd call the police, child services, anyone who would listen, because this wasn't sweeping under the rug like the time Chris got drunk and wrecked the car in high school, or when Dad's anger left bruises Mom covered with makeup. They hung up eventually, Mom whispering, "Please, think about the family," as if that word just poisoned everything. Alone in the house, with Jamie asleep upstairs clutching his stuffed bear, I collapsed on the couch, the throw blanket smelling faintly of laundry detergent, my phone buzzing with texts from Chris, innocent denials, pleas to talk it out like siblings. But I ignored them, the pain raw and unrelenting, a mix of fury at their entitlement, grief for Jamie's lost innocence, and a bone-deep guilt that I'd entrusted him to monsters disguised as kin. The house felt too quiet, the clock ticking toward midnight, and I knew sleep wouldn't come, not with the images haunting me, the what-ifs replaying like a bad loop on my mind's screen. This was the fallout, the immediate shatter, where trust evaporated like morning fog, leaving only the cold truth. I'd fight back, dismantle their delusions of perfection, even if it meant burning bridges I'd once called home, because Jamie's safety, his healing, was worth every scorched earth. As the rain eased to a drizzle, I stared at the ceiling, planning the next steps, calling a therapist in the morning, documenting everything in a notebook I'd grabbed from the junk drawer, knowing this was just the beginning of a war I never wanted, but one I'd wage with every fiber of my being. That first full night after the call felt like drowning in slow motion, the house settling around me with creaks and sighs that sounded too much like judgment. The rain reduced to a soft patter now, as if even the weather had tired of the drama. I sat on the edge of Jamie's bed for a long time after he finally drifted off, his breathing even but shallow, one hand still clutching the hem of my shirt until sleep loosened his grip. I studied the faint freckles across his nose, the way his lashes were still damp from earlier tears, and the guilt clawed deeper because I'd let this happen under my watch, because I'd believed family meant safety when it clearly didn't anymore. Downstairs, I couldn't bring myself to turn on the overhead lights, too harsh, so I lit the small lamp on the side table, its warm glow pooling over the half-eaten pizza box and the scattered school papers I'd meant to sign days ago, and I poured a glass of the cheap red I kept for bad shifts at the hospital, though the first sip tasted like ash. My phone lay face down on the counter, vibrating intermittently with notifications I refused to look at yet. Probably Mom's pleading texts, maybe Dad's angry ones, definitely Chris trying to spin this into some misunderstanding, and each buzz felt like a fresh stab, reminding me how they still thought they could control the narrative, how they'd always assumed I'd fold, like I had when Chris borrowed money he never repaid, or when Dad yelled at Mom loud enough for the neighbors to hear, but never loud enough for anyone to call it what it was. I opened the notebook from the junk drawer, the one with grocery lists and Jamie's old height measurements scrawled on the cover, and started writing everything he'd told me, word for word where I could remember, my handwriting shaky, ink smudging where tears fell. It felt clinical, almost detached, like charting a patient's vitals, but every line carved the reality deeper into me until I had to stop and press my palms to my eyes, breathing through the ache in my chest. When the clock hit 1 a.m., I climbed the stairs again, checked on Jamie, still asleep, thumb near his mouth the way he used to when he was little, and then stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, staring at the bed we'd shared before the divorce, now just mine, the duvet smoothed out from habit. I couldn't sleep there tonight. The thought of lying under the same sheets that had once held ordinary nights, Netflix marathons, whispered arguments about bills, Jamie climbing in after nightmares, felt obscene now, tainted by the knowledge of what had been hidden from me. Instead, I dragged the spare comforter and a pillow to the living room couch, the same sagging one we'd bought together at the outlet store years ago, and curled up under it, the fabric cool against my skin, phone charging on the coffee table where I could see the screen light up with more messages I still wouldn't read. Sleep came in fragments, jagged dreams of basement shadows and Jamie's small voice saying, "It's okay, Mom," even as he cried, and each time I woke gasping, heart hammering, I reached for my phone out of reflex, scrolling through old photos instead. Jamie at 8 blowing out birthday candles, the three of us at the county fair, Chris grinning in the background with his arm around my shoulders like the protective big brother he was supposed to be. The betrayal settled heavier with every image, a slow poison spreading through memories I'd once cherished, and I wondered how long they'd been lying, how many times I'd dropped Jamie off with a hug and a wave, thanking them for helping out while I worked overtime to keep the lights on. Around 3, I gave up pretending I could rest and went to the kitchen, brewed decaf because caffeine would only make the racing thoughts worse, and sat at the table with the mug warming my hands, staring at the rain-streaked window where our reflections looked ghostly and small. The confession replayed in loops, not just Jamie's words, but the way his shoulders hunched when he said them, the shame in his eyes that no child should carry, and I hated them for putting it there, hated myself more for not seeing it sooner. When dawn finally grayed the sky, I heard Jamie stir upstairs, the familiar creak of his bed, and I forced myself to stand, splash cold water on my face, pull my hair back, anything to look like the mother he needed instead of the broken woman I felt like. He came down in his pajamas, hair wild, eyes puffy, and paused at the bottom of the stairs, watching me warily as if afraid I might have changed my mind overnight, might send him back anyway. I opened my arms without a word, and he walked into them, pressing his face against my stomach, and we stood like that for minutes, the kitchen clock ticking, coffee cooling untouched on the counter. "We're not going back," I whispered in his hair, the promise tasting like iron and salt. "Never again unless it's on our terms, and only if you want." He nodded against me, small and trusting, and something cracked open then. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the tiniest sliver of space where hope might eventually grow if I guarded it fiercely enough. Outside, the rain had stopped, the world looked washed clean, ordinary houses across the street lighting up one by one as people started their Saturdays, oblivious. I made Jamie pancakes from the mix in the pantry, added chocolate chips because he liked them, and because I needed to do something normal, something kind. And as he ate slowly at the bar, I texted my charge nurse that I was taking a personal day, no explanation, then opened the laptop to search for child therapists who specialized in trauma, my fingers steady now, fueled by a quiet, burning resolve. The night stripped everything bare, trust, illusions of family, the myth that blood protected you, but in its wreckage I found the first hard edge of determination. I would not look away, would not let them rewrite this as a misunderstanding or a phase. This was the beginning of pulling Jamie and myself out of their shadow, one painful, deliberate step at a time, even if it meant walking alone for a while. The next morning arrived brittle and gray, the kind of Sunday where the neighborhood felt hushed, cars washed clean from yesterday's rain parked neatly in driveways, kids riding bikes in slow circles on the cul-de-sac, as if nothing had shifted in the world overnight. But inside our house, everything had, and protecting Jamie became the only clear directive left in the fog of exhaustion and rage. He woke later than usual, padding downstairs in socks that didn't match, one blue, one striped, and hovered near the kitchen island while I scrambled eggs I wasn't sure either of us would eat, the sizzle of butter in the pan the loudest sound between us, until he asked in a small voice, "Are they mad at me?" I set the spatula down too hard, the clatter making him flinch, and I hated how quickly that reflex had become familiar, how my family had trained fear into my child without me noticing. "No, sweetheart," I said, crouching so our eyes were level. "They're not allowed to be mad at you. What happened wasn't your fault, and I'm the one who's angry. At them, not you." He nodded, but the doubt lingered in the way he chewed his whip, so I pulled him onto a stool and we ate standing up, side by side, the eggs tasteless but necessary, and I talked softly about boundaries, the way the articles I'd read at 3 a.m. suggested. No more unsupervised visits, no more drop-offs, no more pretending everything was fine for the sake of family harmony. After breakfast, I called the pediatrician's after-hours line, thank God for Sunday coverage, and left a message explaining we needed an urgent referral to a child trauma specialist, my voice steady even as my free hand shook holding the phone. Then came the hardest part, telling Jamie we had to talk to someone professional, not because he was broken, but because what happened deserved careful, expert care, and he deserved to feel heard by someone who knew how to help kids carry heavy things. He stared at his plate, pushing a piece of egg around, and finally whispered, "Will you stay in the room with me?" I promised I would for the first few sessions if the therapist allowed it, and that small concession seemed to ease something in him, enough that he let me hug him again without stiffening. Mid-morning, my phone lit up with a call from Mom, her third since last night, and I answered this time stepping onto the back porch where the air smelled of wet grass and distant barbecue smoke from someone else's ordinary weekend. She started with apologies laced with deflection. "We're all so worried, honey. Jamie must have misunderstood. Chris feels terrible." And I cut through it like slicing fog, telling her in clipped sentences that misunderstandings didn't leave a child terrified of his own uncle, that Grandpa's laughter at roughhousing wasn't protective, it was complicit, and that until they acknowledged the abuse, fully, without excuses, I was done pretending we were one big happy family. She cried then, real sobs that sounded older than her 62 years, and for a moment, pity flickered in me, the daughter who'd always tried to soothe your mother's hurts, but I pushed it down because Jamie's hurt was bigger, fresher, and mine to shield. "We need space," I said. "No calls to Jamie directly, no showing up at the house, no birthday cards or gifts until we're ready. If you want to help, get Chris into mandatory counseling and convince Dad to stop denying it happened." She begged me to reconsider, to think about holidays, about how this would look to cousins and neighbors. And that was when the last thread of patience snapped. I told her the optics didn't matter when a child had been harmed, hung up and blocked her number, then Dad's, then Chris's, the act feeling both final and strangely liberating, like cutting away dead weight that had been dragging me under for years. Back inside, Jamie was on the couch with his tablet, headphones on, watching some cartoon about friendly monsters. Ironic, I thought, and I sat beside him, not too close, letting him set the pace. When he paused the show and looked at me sideways, I asked if he wanted to talk about any of it, and he shook his head, but then added quietly, "I don't want them to hate me for telling." I took his hand, small and warm in mine, and said, "If anyone hates you for telling the truth, that's on them, not you. You did the bravest thing possible, and I'm proud of you every single second." He leaned into my shoulder then, just a little, and we sat like that through the rest of the episode, the cartoon colors flickering across our faces, a fragile normalcy settling over the room. Later, I texted my best friend Mara, single mom, no-nonsense ER nurse I'd worked with for a decade, and she came over that afternoon with takeout coffee and a bag of Jamie's favorite muffins. No questions at first, just sitting on the porch swing with me while he played in the backyard, kicking a soccer ball against the fence in rhythmic thuds. When I finally told her everything, haltingly, the words tasting like rust, she didn't gasp or offer platitudes, she just listened, then said, "You're doing the right thing. They don't get to keep their perfect picture if it costs him his safety." Her words anchored me, reminded me I wasn't entirely alone in this, and when she left, she hugged Jamie extra long, told him he was tough as hell, and slipped me a list of local support groups for parents of kids who'd experienced abuse. That night, after Jamie was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table again, the notebook open, adding today's details, the pediatrician call, the blocked numbers, Mara's visit, and felt the first faint shift. Not relief, not yet, but a sense that the ground beneath me, though cracked, was still solid enough to stand on. Protecting Jamie meant drawing lines my family had never respected before, enforcing consequences they'd never faced, and in doing so, I was rewriting the rules of what family could mean, starting with the two of us here in the small house that suddenly felt less like a cage and more like a beginning. Monday morning came too soon. the alarm pulling me from shallow sleep on the couch where I'd stayed again, body stiff from the unfamiliar angle, the living room still dark except for the faint blue glow of the microwave clock reading 5:47. I moved quietly so Jamie wouldn't wake yet, made coffee in the half-light, the machine's hiss, the only sound besides my own uneven breathing as the weekend's decisions hardened into something I had to live with now. School drop-off felt surreal. Jamie buckled in the back seat, clutching his backpack like a shield, the radio tuned low to some pop station neither of us really heard. And when I pulled up to the curb, he hesitated before opening the door, turning to me with eyes that searched mine for reassurance. "You'll pick me up?" he asked. And I nodded, promising I'd be right there at 3, no detours, no extra errands. He gave a small nod and slipped out, shoulders hunched against the cool March air, and I watched him disappear through the school doors until the crossing guard waved me on. The drive to the hospital felt longer than usual, traffic crawling past strip malls and coffee drive-thrus, and I kept replaying the blocked numbers on my phone, the silence from my family louder than any argument. Part of me waited for them to push through anyway, show up at the house, call from a different line, send Mara with a message, but the quiet held, and in that absence I felt both relief and a strange hollow grief, the kind that comes when you realize the people you once relied on might never cross back over the line you drew. At work, I threw myself into the shift. Vitals, med passes, charting in the break room during lunch, but my mind kept drifting to Jamie, to the therapist appointment I'd booked for Wednesday after school, to the weekend I suddenly needed away from these four walls that still echoed with what he'd told me. After my shift ended early, thankfully no overtime today, I picked Jamie up, drove us through a drive-thru for burgers and fries because cooking felt impossible, and over the crinkle of paper bags I told him I was thinking of taking us somewhere for a couple nights, just the two of us, somewhere quiet where we could breathe. His eyes lit up a fraction, the first real spark since Friday, and he asked if we could go to the beach house Aunt Lisa rented last summer, the little place 2 hours north with the creaky porch and the view of the Sound. I hadn't thought of it until he said it, but yes, that felt right. Far enough to feel separate, close enough to get back if needed. I called Lisa from the parking lot while Jamie finished his fries in the car, the windows cracked to let out the smell of salt and ketchup. She answered on the second ring, voice warm but cautious because she'd heard whispers already. Small-town family networks move fast. And when I explained I needed the place this coming weekend, no questions, just space, she didn't hesitate. "Keys under the blue pot by the back door," she said. "Stay as long as you need. And, Sarah, I'm here if you want to talk or if you don't." Her kindness landed soft, no pressure, and I thanked her through the lump in my throat, hung up, and felt the first real exhale in days. That evening, I packed lightly, clothes for both of us, Jamie's favorite books and the Switch he hadn't touched much lately, chargers, the notebook where I kept recording details for the eventual report to child services, and while he did homework at the kitchen table, I sat across from him, pretending to scroll emails on my phone, but really watching the way he chewed the end of his pencil, the small frown that meant he was concentrating. When he finished, I asked what rules he wanted for the weekend. No phones except for emergencies, no talking about them unless he brought it up, lots of walks on the beach, maybe pancakes every morning, and he added quietly, "Can we build a fire one night?" I said yes, of course, and something in the planning felt like reclaiming ground, like turning the days ahead into something we controlled instead of endured. Tuesday passed in a blur of routine, school, work, grocery run for road trip snacks, and that night I finally slept in my own bed, Jamie asking to leave his door open just in case, the hallway light left on like when he was 5. Wednesday morning, I called in a favor and got the afternoon off for the first therapy session. The waiting room smelled of lavender diffuser and children's books. The therapist, Dr. Elena, mid-40s, calm eyes behind glasses, greeted us gently, let Jamie decide if I stayed in the room, which he did, sitting close enough that our knees touched, and spent the hour mostly listening to him in small, careful bursts, while I held back tears at how matter-of-factly he described things I still couldn't fully process. When she left, she gave me a folder of resources, a gentle reminder that healing wasn't linear, and Jamie reached for my hand in the parking lot without me asking, his fingers threading through mine like he hadn't done in months. That evening, we loaded the car after dinner, takeout tie because the kitchen felt too full of decisions, and drove north as the sky darkened, Jamie dozing against the window, streetlights sliding over his face in soft gold streaks. The beach house welcomed us with salt air and the faint creak of floorboards. I unlocked the door, flipped on lights, and Jamie ran straight to the porch, breathing deep like he had been holding it for days. We unpacked slowly, made hot chocolate from packets in the cupboard, sat on the couch under a quilt while waves murmured outside, and for the first time since the confession, the silence between us felt peaceful instead of heavy. I didn't check my phone, left it in the car on silent, and in that deliberate disconnection, I began to feel the shape of what I needed. Distance, not just physical, but emotional. Rules that said my family's comfort no longer trumped our safety. Transparency that would be demanded if they ever wanted back in, starting with written apologies, therapy records, proof Chris was no longer a risk. The weekend stretched ahead like blank pages. Walks along the tide line, picking up shells, Jamie laughing when cold water soaked his sneakers, quiet evenings with board games and the crackle of the fire pit. And in those small, ordinary moments, I sensed the beginning of space where trust could regrow, not towards them yet, but towards the life Jamie and I were building without their shadows. The ocean kept its steady rhythm outside, patient and unyielding, reminding me that some things take time, erosion and rebuilding both. And for now, this distance, this hard-won pause, was the kindest thing I could give us both. The first therapy session alone felt like stepping into a room with no floor, just air and the faint smell of eucalyptus from the diffuser on Dr. Elena's side table. The clock on the wall ticking so softly it might have been my own pulse, slowing as I sat in the chair opposite her, knees pressed together, hands clasped so tightly my knuckles whitened. Jamie had gone to school that Monday after our weekend at the beach house, his goodbye hug lingering a second longer than usual, and I'd driven straight here instead of work, using a sick day I hadn't taken in years because the idea of charting IVs and smiling at patients while my mind replayed every detail of what he'd endured felt impossible. Dr. Elena didn't rush me. She waited until the silence stretched thin, and I finally said, I keep thinking if I'd noticed sooner, if I'd asked the right questions, paid attention to how quiet he got after visits, none of this would have happened. The words tumbling out like they'd been waiting behind a dam for years. She nodded. No platitudes about how I couldn't have known, just a gentle, guilt is loud, especially for parents. It wants to rewrite the past so we feel in control again. But right now, the question isn't, what did I miss? It's, what can I do today to keep him safe and help him heal? We talked about the anger that surged in unpredictable waves, at my parents for enabling, at Chris for the act itself, at myself for trusting too easily, and how it sometimes turned inward until I felt like I was suffocating under it. She asked me to name one small thing I'd done right since the disclosure, and after a long pause, I said, I believed him the first time. I didn't question or minimize. She wrote that down, and seeing it on her notepad made it real, something solid I could hold on to when the doubt crept back in at night. By the end of the hour, my shoulders had dropped an inch, the knot in my chest loosened just enough to breathe deeper, and she gave me homework. One act of self-kindness each day, no matter how small, coffee without rushing, a walk around the block after dinner, 10 minutes of nothing, and to keep journaling not just facts, but feelings, because burying them only made them heavier. That afternoon, I picked Jamie up from school, and instead of driving straight home, we stopped at the park near the house, the one with the wooden bridge over the creek where he used to throw sticks and watch them float away. He ran ahead, sneakers crunching gravel, and I followed slowly, phone in my pocket turned off because I'd decided no checking for messages from blocked numbers today. The space I'd claimed at the beach house had started to feel less like escape and more like a necessary boundary I could carry with me. We sat on a bench, shared a bag of grapes I'd grabbed from the fridge, and when he leaned against me watching ducks paddle in lazy circles, I felt the first tentative bridge between us since the confession. Not words, just presence, the quiet understanding that we were both trying, both hurting, both still here. That evening, after he was in bed, I opened the journal again, wrote about the park, about how his laugh when a duck quacked back at him had cracked something open in me, a small, warm spot amid the cold. Tuesday, I went back to work, managed a half shift without dissolving, came home to find a voicemail from an unknown number, Mom's voice, shaky, saying she'd started seeing a counselor, that Dad was processing, that Chris had moved out temporarily, and though I didn't call back, I saved the message instead of deleting it, a tiny acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, the first cracks were appearing in their denial. Wednesday was joint session day. Jamie and I sat side by side on the small couch in Dr. Elena's office, him tugging at a loose thread on his hoodie while she asked gentle questions about what felt safe right now, what felt scary. He spoke more than I expected. Short sentences about nightmares, about not wanting to be alone in the basement at home, even though ours was just storage. And when he finished, she turned to me and asked if there was anything I wanted to say to him in this space. I swallowed, looked at him straight on, and said, I'm sorry I didn't protect you better before. I promise I'm learning how to do it right now, every day, and if I ever make a mistake again, you can tell me. I'll listen. His eyes filled, but he didn't cry. Instead, he reached over and took my hand, fingers small but firm, and held on through the rest of the session. When we left the building, the late afternoon sun slanted low across the parking lot, turning everything gold, and Jamie said quietly, Thanks for coming in with me. I squeezed his hand once before letting go so he could climb into the car, and that small exchange felt like the first real vulnerability we'd shared since the truth came out. Not dramatic, not tear-socked, just honest and present. Thursday night, I cooked spaghetti, nothing fancy, jar sauce and garlic bread from the freezer, and while we ate at the kitchen table, Jamie talked about a science project on volcanoes, the first normal kid conversation in what felt like forever, and I let myself laugh at his impression of the teacher's excited voice without forcing it. After dishes, I sat on the couch with my laptop, researching family reunification guidelines, not because I was ready to let anyone back in, but because knowing the steps, supervised visits only after individual therapy progress reports, written accountability from each person involved, and ongoing monitoring, gave me a map instead of endless fog. I printed the key points, tucked them into the folder Dr. Elena had given me, and felt the shift again, from reactive fury to deliberate, careful rebuilding, starting with myself. That night, I slept in my bed for the first time in over a week. Door open, hallway light on, Jamie's soft snores drifting down from upstairs, and though sleep still came in fits, the dreams were less jagged, more like echoes than fresh wounds. In the quiet hours before dawn, I thought about the hand-holding in therapy, the way his fingers had trusted mine again, and realized that the smallest acts, showing up, staying present, admitting my own fear, were the ones stitching us together, thread by fragile thread, in a pattern neither of us had known we needed until the old one tore apart. The waiting room felt smaller on the day we walked in together for our first joint session. The lavender scent stronger than usual, or maybe just more noticeable because my nerves had sharpened everything. Jamie's sneakers squeaking faintly on the linoleum as we crossed to the couch where Dr. Elena already sat with her notepad balanced on her knee, offering that same calm half smile that never felt forced. I'd spent the morning at the hospital charting discharges and dodging small talk from colleagues who sensed something was off but didn't pry, then rushed home to pick Jamie up early so we could eat a quick lunch, peanut butter sandwiches on the porch because the kitchen still carried too much emotional static, and now here we were, side by side again, his knee brushing mine like an anchor, while Dr. Elena started by asking each of us what we hoped might happen in this space today. Jamie spoke first, voice low but steady, saying he wanted to understand why Uncle Chris did what he did without it being his fault, and the simplicity of the question hit me like cold water. I hadn't realized how much he'd been carrying that particular why, turning it over in his mind alone. Dr. Elena nodded, then turned to me, and I found myself saying, I want to name the deeper things out loud so they stop living only inside us. How my family's pattern of silence and denial let this happen. How I learned to keep peace at any cost growing up, and how that almost cost him everything. The words hung there, heavier than I'd expected, and Jamie looked at me sideways, not shocked exactly, but listening in a way that made my throat tighten. Dr. Elena invited us to unpack one piece at a time, starting with the family pattern because it seemed to thread through both our hurts. I described the house I grew up in, the raised voices that always ended with Mom apologizing even when she wasn't wrong, the way Dad's temper was treated as weather we had to endure, Chris's mischief excused because he was the boy who'd make something of himself, and how I'd carried that script into adulthood, smoothing edges, avoiding conflict, believing loyalty meant looking past cracks. Jamie listened without interrupting, then quietly added that Grandpa had told him once, after the bad touch happened, that men in our family are tough, we don't whine. And hearing him repeat it verbatim felt like a fresh bruise blooming under skin. I reached over instinctively and covered his hand with mine on the cushion between us, not squeezing, just resting there, and he didn't pull away. Dr. Elena asked if he wanted to say anything directly to me about that moment, and after a long pause, he turned toward me, eyes glassy but clear, and said, I was scared you'd think I was whining too, so I didn't tell you right away. The admission cracked something wide open in me. Guilt, yes, but also a fierce tenderness, and I answered without planning the words, I wish I'd made it safe for you to whine, to cry, to say no, long before any of this. I'm working on being the kind of mom who hears everything, even the hard stuff, without making it smaller. He nodded once, small but deliberate, and Dr. Elena suggested we try something tangible. If either of us felt ready, we could move closer on the couch, let shoulders touch, or hold hands again like last time. No pressure. Jamie shifted first, scooting until our arms pressed together from elbow to wrist, the warmth of him grounding me more than any words could, and I let my pinky curl lightly around his, a quiet question he answered by hooking his around mine in return. The rest of the hour passed in careful increments, naming how denial had protected the adults more than the child, how Chris's charm had always bought him second chances I now refused to give, how Dad's minimization was less about disbelief and more about preserving his own image of the family he'd built. And each naming felt like pulling a thorn, painful but necessary, the wound cleaner afterward. When time ended, Dr. Elena asked us to name one small step we'd take before the next session. Jamie said he'd tried telling me one thing each night at bedtime that bothered him, even if it was just a bad grade or a mean comment at recess, and I promised to share one honest feeling from my day too, no filtering. Walking out to the car, the air felt cooler, late spring breeze carrying the scent of cut grass from the office park lawn, and Jamie reached up to hold my hand properly this time, fingers laced, swinging lightly between us as we crossed the lot. At home, I made grilled cheese and tomato soup for dinner, comfort food I hadn't cooked since before everything broke, and while we ate, he told me about a kid in math class who'd teased him for missing a homework deadline, how it made him feel small, and I listened without jumping to fix it, just nodded and said, that sounds really frustrating. Want to brainstorm ways to handle it tomorrow? He thought for a second and then said maybe he'd talk to the teacher privately, and I felt the shift again, trust rebuilding not in grand gestures, but in these ordinary exchanges, the everyday rhythm returning with new rules underneath. Later, after he brushed his teeth and climbed into bed, I sat on the edge of the mattress like I used to when he was little, and told him about my own day, the knot of anxiety in staff meeting when a colleague asked why I'd been quiet lately, how I'd answered vaguely and then felt guilty for not being fully present, and he listened seriously, then patted my arm and said, it's okay to not be okay sometimes. The words, so simple from a 12-year-old, landed deep, and I leaned down to kiss his forehead, lingering there a moment longer than necessary. Downstairs, I opened the journal, wrote about the hand-holding in therapy, the way our pinkies had linked like a promise renewed, and realized that naming the deeper issues hadn't erased the pain, but had started to shrink its power over us, turning it from a suffocating fog into something we could face together, one named truth at a time. Outside the window, the streetlights came on one by one, ordinary and steady, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the faint stirrings of hope. Not loud, not certain, but real. Enough to carry us forward into whatever came next. The idea for the family trip started small, almost accidental, during one of the later joint sessions when Dr. Elena asked Jamie what might feel like a safe way to test new ground, not with the old family, but with just the two of us doing something bigger than the park or the beach house, something that carried the weight of ordinary memories we could reclaim on our terms. He thought for a long minute, twisting the drawstring on his hoodie, then said quietly that he missed camping, the kind we used to do when he was 8 or 9, before the divorce made weekends complicated, and before everything else made trust feel fragile. He remembered the tent in the state park an hour east, the fire ring, the way stars looked clearer away from streetlights, and how we'd roast marshmallows and tell bad jokes until we laughed ourselves hoarse. I felt a pang at the memory. Those trips had been simple. Alex still around then, the three of us crammed in one tent, listening to crickets, and the fact that Jamie could still want that, despite how much had shifted, felt like a gift I hadn't earned yet. Dr. Elena nodded, suggested we plan it deliberately, set clear rules beforehand, no phones in the tent at night, check-ins about how each of us was feeling, permission to change plans anytime, and use the weekend to practice the small steps we'd been building, honest sharing, physical closeness when it felt right, noticing when old fears crept in without letting them take over. We booked the same site we'd used years ago, the one near the lake with a short trail to a lookout, reserved for the first weekend in May when the weather promised to be mild and the bugs not yet unbearable. I packed the old tent from the garage, still smelling faintly of pine and smoke, sleeping bags, the cooler with hot dogs and s'mores supplies, Jamie's fishing rod, even though neither of us was any good at it, and the portable speaker for the playlist we'd made together the week before, mostly his choices, some old folk songs I'd slipped in because they reminded me of those earlier trips. The drive out was quiet at first, windows down, spring air rushing in with the scent of blooming dogwoods and fresh-cut fields. Jamie fiddled with the radio until he found a station playing indie covers, then leaned his head against the window, watching trees blur past. Halfway there, he asked, out of nowhere, "Do you think we'll ever go camping with other people again?" I kept my eyes on the road, heart thudding, and answered honestly, "Maybe someday, if it feels completely safe for both of us, but right now, this, us figuring it out together, is the most important thing. No rush to add anyone else." He nodded, seemed satisfied, and reached over to turn the volume up a little, letting the music fill the space where heavier words might have sat. We arrived mid-afternoon, the campground half full with other families setting up, kids chasing each other between sites, the normalcy of it both comforting and strange after months of everything feeling edged with caution. We pitched the tent in the same spot as before, flat ground near the fire ring, trees close enough to feel sheltered, and Jamie helped hammer stakes without me asking, his movements sure, almost proud. By dusk, the fire crackled low, hot dogs charred on sticks because we both liked them that way, and we sat on the log bench sharing a bag of chips, talking about nothing big at first, the way the lake looked like glass at sunset, how the ranger had warned about bears, but Jamie thought it was cool anyway. Then, as stars began to prick through the darkening sky, he went quiet, poked the fire with a longer stick, and said softly, "I used to think if I was good enough, nothing bad would happen again. Like, if I didn't complain, they'd stop." The words landed heavy in the crackling silence. I set my marshmallow stick down, moved closer on the log until our shoulders touched, and said, "You were always good enough. What happened wasn't because you weren't, it was because they failed to protect you, and that's on them, not you. You don't have to earn safety by being quiet or perfect anymore." He leaned into me then, fully, the way he hadn't since he was small, and I wrapped an arm around his shoulders, feeling the slight tremor in him that might have been cold or emotion, or both. We stayed like that until the fire burned to embers, then crawled into the tent. He asked if we could leave the rain fly off so we could see stars through the mesh, and I said yes, zipping the door but leaving the top open to the night sky. In the dark, sleeping bags rustling, he whispered, "Thanks for not making me go back yet." And I reached across the narrow space between us, found his hand, and held it until his breathing evened into sleep. The next day, we hiked the short trail to the lookout, Jamie ahead of me pointing out birds and wildflowers, laughing when I slipped on loose gravel and caught myself on a tree. At the top, we sat on the rocky outcrop, shared water from the same bottle, and he surprised me by saying, "I think I'm ready to try holding your hand in public again, like when we walked through the campground." It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet permission, but it felt enormous, a reclaiming of something so basic that had been tainted with fear. That night, around the fire, we made s'mores, chocolate melting onto fingers, graham crackers crumbling, and when he licked marshmallow off his thumb and grinned at me with that crooked smile I hadn't seen in months, I felt forgiveness. Not the big, sweeping kind, but the slow, earned kind that comes from shared survival and small, repeated proofs that safety could hold again. On the drive home Sunday afternoon, windows down again, playlist looping, Jamie dozed against the seatbelt, face slack in sunlight, and I kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near his on the center console, close enough that our pinkies brushed every time the road curved. The weekend hadn't erased the scars, nightmares still came sometimes, trust with others remained cautious, but it had layered something new over them, proof that closeness could feel good again, that laughter could return without apology, that a mother and son could rebuild a world together even after the old one shattered. As we pulled into our driveway, the house looked the same, porch light on timer, mailbox stuffed with flyers, but inside me, something had shifted further towards solid ground, scarred, yes, but stronger for the testing, ready to carry us into whatever came next with a little less fear and a little more faith in the quiet work we'd done. A year to the day since Jamie first sat at the breakfast bar and told me he didn't want to go back to Grandma and Grandpa's, the kitchen looked almost the same. Same chipped blue mugs hanging from hooks, same magnetic calendar on the fridge with dentist appointments and soccer practices circled in different colors, same faint scent of coffee lingering from breakfast, but the air inside felt different, lighter in a way that had taken 12 slow months to earn. I stood at the counter slicing apples for his lunch while he finished homework at the table, earbuds in, humming along to whatever playlist he'd curated this week, and every few minutes he'd glance up, catch my eye, and give that small half-smile that said more than words ever could. We're okay. We're still here. The calendar showed today as Saturday, May 15th, 2026. No big milestones circled, no cake planned, just an ordinary weekend that happened to mark the quiet anniversary of the day everything cracked open and we started rebuilding from the pieces. I'd woken early, made coffee the way I always did now, strong, black, sipped standing at the sink while watching the neighborhood wake up, and thought about how far the distance between then and now really was. The nights I'd slept on the couch because the bed felt too empty and too full of ghosts. The therapy sessions where Jamie and I learned to name feelings instead of swallowing them. The camping trip that proved laughter could still live in our bodies. The slow, deliberate choice to keep the old family at arm's length until, maybe, if ever, they showed real, sustained change. Mom had started individual counseling 6 months ago, sent me monthly progress notes through a neutral email address I'd set up for exactly that purpose. Dad had joined her reluctantly after another 3 months, his messages shorter but less defensive, admitting in one that he'd missed a lot and was trying to understand why. Chris remained the hardest line, still in court-mandated therapy after the investigation concluded with substantiated findings, no charges pressed because Jamie chose not to pursue them, but a protective order in place that meant no contact without strict supervision we hadn't yet allowed. I didn't forgive them in the sweeping, cinematic sense. Forgiveness had come in fragments. Pity for Mom's trembling voice on rare voicemails, a grudging acknowledgement that Dad's silence now might be shame rather than denial, a weary acceptance that Chris's charm had always hidden something broken I couldn't fix. But the pieces didn't add up to trust, not yet, and I was learning that was okay. Some bridges stayed burned for good reason. Jamie closed his laptop, stretched, and wandered over to snag an apple slice from the cutting board, crunching it thoughtfully before saying, "You're thinking about the date, aren't you?" I paused, knife hovering, and nodded. There was no point pretending with him anymore. "Yeah, 1 year since you told me." He leaned against the counter beside me, close enough that our arms brushed, a casual closeness we'd both fought to reclaim. I was scared you'd be mad at me for ruining everything. The admission still carried a faint echo of old shame, but it came out steady, no tremor. I set the knife down, turned to face him fully. I was never mad at you. I was mad at them, at myself, at the whole messed up system that let it happen. You didn't ruin anything. You saved us from staying in something that was hurting you. He nodded, took another bite, then added quietly, "I'm glad we didn't go back, even if sometimes I miss parts of it, the pool, the cookies, but not enough to trade how safe I feel now." The words landed soft but solid, proof of how much healing had happened in the quiet spaces between therapy appointments and school runs and late-night talks on the couch. I reached over, tucked a strand of hair behind his ear the way I used to when he was smaller, and he let me, didn't flinch or pull away. "Me too," I said. "I miss the idea of family sometimes, the big holidays, the easy belonging, but not the cost. We've built something better here, just us. And if anyone earns their way back in, it'll be because they've changed enough to respect what we need, not because we need them." He considered that, then grinned a little before saying, "Can we still do s'mores tonight, even if it's just the backyard fire pit?" I laughed, the sound surprising me with how easy it felt, and said yes, of course. We'd make a proper mess with extra chocolate and probably burn the first batch like always. The rest of the day unfolded in ordinary pieces. Grocery run for marshmallows and hot dogs, Jamie kicking a soccer ball against the garage while I weeded the flower bed, takeout pizza for dinner because neither of us felt like cooking, then dusk settling over the yard as we dragged lawn chairs to the fire pit and built the flames low and steady. We sat shoulder to shoulder, toasting marshmallows on long sticks, the night air cool enough for hoodies, but warm enough to stay out late. Jamie talked about school, trying out for the travel soccer team, a girl in his class who liked the same band he did, how he'd finally told his best friend a little about why he'd switched schools last fall, and I listened, asked questions, shared that I'd started thinking about taking a photography class at the community center because I wanted to capture more of these moments, the small ones, that mattered. When the fire died to glowing coals, we stayed anyway, wrapped in the same quilt from the camping trip, stars faint above the glow of porch lights. Jamie rested his head on my shoulder, the way he hadn't in public since he was 9, and said into the quiet, "Thanks for fighting for me, Mom. I know it wasn't easy." I swallowed hard, kissed the top of his head and whispered, "You're worth every hard thing, and I'm proud of how you fought too. Every day you choose to trust again, to laugh, to keep going. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen." He didn't answer, just pressed closer, and we sat like that until the coals were ash and the night turned chilly. Inside, after he went upstairs to bed, I lingered in the kitchen, rinsed mugs, wiped counters, the routine grounding me as always. The notebook from the junk drawer still sat on the shelf, pages filled now with progress notes, small victories, hard days, but instead I stood at the window, looking out at the dark yard where the fire pit still held a faint warmth, and felt the truth settle deep. We weren't perfect, the scars hadn't vanished, nightmares still came occasionally, trust with the wider world remained cautious, but we were stronger in the broken places, more honest, more present, more willing to name what hurt and choose what healed. The family we'd lost had been an illusion built on silence. The family we'd made was real, hard-earned, and ours. I turned off the kitchen light, climbed the stairs, paused at Jamie's door to hear his even breathing, then slipped into my own bed, the sheets cool and familiar. Sleep came easier these days. Not perfect, but peaceful enough, carrying the quiet hope that tomorrow would be another ordinary day in a life we'd fought to keep safe and good. And that, after everything, felt like the truest kind of victory.